Okay, so like I'm home alone, so that means two things. One, good clothes, dog. Woo. Two, I get to vlog incredibly loudly for an audience of nobody and not have any negative consequences, besides the crippling self-hatred later that comes from producing these things. Anyway, so today we've got editing styles. So like, earlier today, I rewatched, or yesterday sometime, my life is an atemporal nightmare, but, I was rewatching, the Pause and Select video about Hodo Musico, the, Hodo Musico in Love, and, at several points in that he brings up, the disjunctive editing style, like, reflecting the style of, the poem Clear Day Lune, and, which is interesting and good. Cause like it got me thinking about just how videos are edited in general. Because Pause and Select in that says that he personally does the same thing that Hodo Musico does, with disjunctive, quick cuts to something else at very precise moments. In the name of like manipulating the audience's feelings or whatever. Yeah. So I felt like sitting down and like trying to describe what makes that style uniquely work for Joe. So like the thing about Joe's videos, in like comparison to mine, for instance, my main channel videos, I talk way faster than I probably should, right? So, like, people continually call me out on this. Everybody that I show my videos to says this about it. But, Joe actually talks at pretty much the same speed in a lot of his videos and never gets comments about that, right? And it's because of this academic tone that his videos create in significant part, like the feeling that you get from Joe's videos that if you don't get it, you're stupid, not if you don't get it, I'm just talking too fast. But more importantly, I think, and more subtly, is the fact that the editing style itself kind of just like hints at this demandment of full attention, right? Which is not something that you're used to with YouTube, or at least the typical audience member isn't used to with YouTube. You've got like people like Digibro, for instance, Digibro After Dark, whose primary appeal is just the total flow of his vlogs, as I don't remember who said that, but basically total flow is this concept where that's like supposedly like the defining element of TV as a medium, and by extension a lot of popular YouTube as a medium, where it's just this continual, uninterruptible flow of information that just like stays on in the background throughout everything, and you're not intended to like try to absorb all of that, because that's not the nature of TV, that's not the nature of vlogging, YouTube in particular, especially. Yeah, and so this is kind of like challenged by Joe's editing style, though, because he goes out of his way to have not partially because he has like the super high quality clips of everything, but also partially because he has everything so perfectly in sync to have these quick disjunctive cuts away from one thing and towards another, and so. And everything from that, as opposed to television or opposed to especially vlogs where you literally just have a single shot the whole time. And the only interesting element of it is the way that the person is speaking and the content itself. So unless those two things are emotional, you're not going to have any kind of emotional resonance from a vlog. Meanwhile, over with Joe, you've got this just subtle implication that because of the way that the videos are put together, everything is important, everything has to be light on top of everything else, and that's like the core of that's the core of what makes Joe's style in particular work. Now, where this gets interesting is when you break away from just like how long a specific shot is held and when you cut to another one, because that's essentially what makes up like all of movie editing, for instance. And when yeah, that's the extent of it in most things that have any like degree of popularity, besides like minor technical stuff. Yeah, like green screens and other stuff that's like relatively easy to do as long as the effects come pre-generated, but when you get to YouTube, though, especially experimental YouTube, like YouTube Poop is the most popular example, but also people like Weeb Trash Productions, aka Princess Plunderphonics, and what they do with editing, where it becomes like creative and interesting, then you have to worry about a whole new set of problems opening up in regards to what your audience is like intended to feel. So like, the thing about something like, let's say the art final. There's this scene near the end of this incredible YouTube poop by Awful Fawful called the art final, where it's basically just like a minute or a minute and a half straight of a continuous blare of information that's like not meant to be digestible at all to any sane person, right? Um, it's just like there's just constant noise and visual information that's just overflowing, and yeah. But like oddly enough, when you look at the comment section of that video, you find people saying things like, "Is it weird that I find this video calming to watch?" And you're right. That's exactly what it is, because it achieves that method of total flow of just like you're immersed and just getting lost in the void of what you're watching. Not because there isn't anything there, but because there's too much there. It's like the Kantian notion of the sublime, where there's no humanity left in it. It's just this constant rotation of subjects and what's in focus to such a degree that that itself becomes the aesthetic appeal. And so then you have something like Weeb Trash Productions, which is kind of similar to a degree. It's not like the same continual like overwhelmingness of it, but the feeling of just getting lost in what you're observing is the aesthetic appeal of End of Trash and Surrealist Manifesto in particular. And then a few things over on Plunges Plunderphonic, but to a lesser degree. Yeah, where you just have the surrealness of the imagery itself contrasted against what's actually being discussed, and just how wacky and out of nowhere it is, and especially in End of Trash in particular. That's what I find so great about like the continual literal noise in the background that goes throughout so much of the early part of that video, is that it just again just builds on this atmosphere of we're not trying to be like quick pointed disjunctful cuts between different things in order to create emotions, because again that's what traditional film editing is based. I don't know why I did quotes there. Film editing is based on, but it's just a complete rejection of that in order to create emotions through completely different ways. The only thing that's like which kind of like loses some things in translation, because the thing that when you aren't like trying to create things that are traditionally aesthetically beautiful and only going off of this absurdist, there isn't any rhyme or reason to what you're seeing here, as long as that's the atmosphere that you're going for, there are certain emotions that cannot be tapped into. Whereas if you're going with the everything is incredibly deliberate with precisely when you cut and that being your only editing technique, there is a much broader range of emotions that you can express through the editing itself. On one hand, you've got something like Daria, right? The TV show that's like a spin-off of Beavis and Butthead, where like that entire show is literally just like I've the concept of just ceaseless flow of information there is that comes from TV. It's not like an overwhelming of information in Daria. It's just like the continual flow of itself constantly being on in TV in general is taken to its absolute logical extreme in Daria. Where the show itself is designed specifically to convey these feelings of just being like there, sitting there, just like transfixed but not really feeling anything at the same time on this one show that seems like it should by all accounts and all reason be boring, and you're just sitting there continuing to watch it anyway. It's exactly what television is for a lot of younger people. Well, anybody who's watching it for the sake of not getting a complete story, but just like it's a time filler, because that's what art generally is for a lot of people. But then on the other hand, you have something that uses all the same editing techniques as Daria, which is just like shots that drag on for a lot longer than they're supposed to, and the camera being stuck in place the whole time. End of Ava, like the last scene of End of Ava. One More Final I Need You. And where it uses that same thing, because the entire rest of the movie, it's designed as a film. It's supposed to like completely immerse the viewer. That's what the massive massive projector screens of film, that's the most defining aspect of it, is that as long as you're in that room, there is no escape from the movie screen. And so it's not this just ceaseless flow of a malaise being streamed into your brain. It's instead this something that you are deliberately supposed to pay attention to. But End of Ava's last scene, it uses the same editing techniques that you would expect from that, which is holding shots for way too long and never making the camera move. But it does it in the name of creating immense anxiety. Right? So you've got just Shinji and Asuka on the beach after like the apocalypse has essentially happened, and everything is like seemingly miserable. Things seem to be just like yeah. And so when you're holding there, just like anxious to see what happens, that's just a completely different contextualization of those same techniques. Whereas when you have like this postmodernist editing style, the only thing that you can really do, as long as you're going specifically for surrealism, is that feeling of the sort of relaxed but also sort of on edge and ready to be emotionally gut punched vibe that you get from things like the Art Final or Weeb Trash Productions. Yeah. And so that's what I think a lot of AniTube essentially misses, is this understanding of the emotions of your script and trying to recontextualize essentially basic editing techniques like that into something interesting and good in that regard. Because like as it stands, there are basically, for the most part, aside from Pause and Select and maybe a few others, nobody has purposeful editing on YouTube, on AniTube by and large. There's like aside from Weeb obviously, but you've got like Weeb on one hand with like the surrealist, incredibly high effort insanity that goes to creating that one specific emotion, and then on the other hand you just have people who just, this is what I'm talking about, I'm going to show a relevant clip of it, and that's all. And that's fine, that's passable if you're not trying to get the audience engaged, but AniTube in general needs to pay a lot more attention to understanding the emotions of their script and making it so that there's either background music or editing or emotions reflected in your narration that like actually contribute back to what your script should be conveying if you're understanding it competently. And then instead you just have the monotonous sort of monotone style of voiceover and editing that gets so popular among pretty much everybody. You've got, and that's like the appeal of Super Eye Patch Wolf, for instance, is that he's like one of the few who even tries to break away from that. But like, and so like his like weird pseudo-emotional narration that he has over like pretty much every, like if you watched like Fall of the Simpsons, How It Happened or whatever, there is no reason the video needs to feel the way it does, but because it feels like something other than just a continual malaise where the only potential emotional evocation is making the viewer feel smart, it's good and interesting to like an audience of people who aren't there primarily for the ideas themselves. And yeah, and so that's the thing with like AMVs. Like Evangelion Opus, is that all they do, the only editing technique they use is just cutting at the right time, but it's incredibly emotionally impactful, and everybody completely underestimates how that works. To bring this back to like Pause and Select, I mentioned just a second ago that the biggest appeal of AniTube, as far as like an emotional reaction goes, is making the viewer feel smart. But the problem with that is that that only continues to extend for a certain amount of time. Once you hit like a certain upper limit of, yes, these are indeed things that I am aware of in storytelling, analysis videos kind of really stop having that impact on you, except for like the really, really interesting ones. I haven't felt that way about an analysis video since I've seen Philosophy of Kreia. But like, something that doesn't have a distinctive editing style, I mean. Then, that's why someone like Pause and Select is so important, is to match the way he edits his videos is so important, because to match the style of his content, that it is like something going above and beyond what's traditionally there on AniTube, in order to overcome the cynicism that a lot of people have towards that anyway, towards trying to feel smart on AniTube, you need to have an editing style that like inherently sets that up from the very beginning, and that's what's cool about that. Joe is indeed a good boy. Oh, that's the end of the vlog.